attacks around Ukrainian nuclear facilities and allow civilian personnel to do their work to ensure the facility's safety and security, as both the IAEA Director General and a resolution adopted yesterday by the agency's Board of Governors have called on Russia to do. The Ukrainian people and government continue to show remarkable courage in defending their country, defending their freedom, defending one another. We said that if President Putin invaded Ukraine, we would increase our support for Ukraine's ability to defend itself while imposing swift and severe costs on the Kremlin. That's exactly what the United States and our allies and partners are doing. That was the focus of our ministerial meetings today with NATO allies, with the G7, with the European Union, as well as in my discussions with NATO Secretary General, with the EU Commission President von der Leyen, with the EU Council President Michel. We want our alliances to be strong enough to meet any threat. That's why from day one, President Biden made reinvigorating and re-energizing our alliances and partnerships the foundation of our foreign policy. It's why, as Secretary of State, I've come to Brussels, home to NATO and the EU, more than to any other world capital. And that's why we invested so much effort in finding new ways and coalitions to bring allies and partners together. Now we're seeing why that work matters. At NATO, we were joined by the ministers of Finland and Sweden, the EU High Representative Josep Borrell, the foreign ministers of Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and Canada, as well as the Secretary General Stoltenberg, also took part in our meeting with the EU. Never before have NATO and the European Union and other partner nations worked so closely together. This is a new kind of cooperation, and we'll bring this to bear not just in this crisis, but in the years to come. And our European allies and partners are stepping up to lead in unprecedented ways. For the first time, NATO has activated and deployed parts of its response force. Several NATO allies, including the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Spain, France, have sent troops and aircraft and ships to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank. Every NATO ally is providing either military or humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Most are providing both. For the first time, the European Union is financing the purchase and delivery of military assistance to a country under attack. The bloc swiftly adopted the biggest sanctions package in history against Russia. And the EU has granted immediate refuge to Ukrainians and others who call Ukraine home, the first time it has invoked this protection mechanism. Individual countries are also taking extraordinary steps. Germany is doubling its defense spending. Poland has opened its arms to more than 500,000 Ukrainian refugees. Switzerland set aside its tradition of neutrality to adopt the European Union's sanctions on Russia. The list goes on. These and other efforts by our European allies to deepen their own capabilities and cooperation do not undermine the transatlantic security alliance, they deepen our collective might. As recently as a few weeks ago, some questioned whether, if the regional or international rules-based order came under threat, whether our European allies and partners would be willing to shoulder their fair share of the burden, the risk, the cost to defend it. In the last 9 days, European countries have demonstrated they are more than ready to stand up and stand together. And the United States is standing with Europe, pursuing complementary actions and policies in close coordination with our allies and partners. To give just a few examples, we've deployed an additional 7,000 troops to Europe and repositioned our forces already on the continent to strengthen NATO's eastern flank. We continue to tighten our severe economic sanctions on Russia. Last night, as I think you know, we extended temporary protective status to tens of thousands of Ukrainians living in the United States. And the President has requested an additional $10 billion from Congress to deliver more humanitarian, security, and economic assistance in Ukraine and the surrounding region over the coming days and weeks. Yesterday, President Putin said his so-called special military operation is proceeding exactly as planned. Well, it's hard to imagine that his plan included inspiring the Ukrainian people to defend their country with such tenacity, strengthening the resolve and solidarity of NATO and the EU, uniting the world in opposition to Moscow, including 141 countries at the United Nations, an unprecedented number of international businesses, associations, cultural institutions that have cut ties with Russia, causing the Russian economy to go into freefall, motivating tens of thousands of Russians to protest, and countless more to leave the country and increasingly turning Russia into a pariah state. If that was President Putin's plan, well, you can say it's working. Russia has never been so isolated. We have never been more united.
So catty.
Let me reiterate one thing, because it's very important. We take these actions not because we oppose the Russian people. We do not. We regret that tens of millions of Russians will suffer because of the dangerous decisions made by a tiny circle of corrupt leaders and their cronies who've consistently put their interests above those of the Russian people, who are doing everything they can to hide their war of choice from the Russian public. Today's discussion with NATO, the EU, the G7 affirmed that we're fully aligned on our...
Welcome aboard, everybody. Hi, I'm Kevin Williams, your Heavenly Father. We are watching right now Secretary Blinken. He is the Secretary of State for the United States, talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine. We also have waiting in the wings a press secretary briefing. I have an audition at noon, so I've got to go. I'm in the Pacific time zone here, but I will go when at noon, basically. It's another 45 minutes. So we'll cover some of Blinken, see if questions happen, and then we'll jump over to Jen Psaki.
NATO's a defensive alliance. We've never sought and will not seek conflict with Russia. But as President Biden has said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. No one should doubt America's readiness or our resolve. At the same time, we'll keep open the door to dialogue and diplomacy, while making clear to the Kremlin that unless it changes course, it will continue down the road of increasing isolation and economic pain. And we'll support Ukraine in its talks with Russia to reach a ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces, something that Foreign Minister Kuleba and I have been discussing on a daily basis. In the meantime, we are working urgently with the government of Ukraine, the ICRC, and others to create humanitarian corridors that will allow civilians to get out of Ukraine's besieged cities and to allow food, medicine, and other vital supplies to get in. Russia's attack created this humanitarian crisis. Now, all countries have a responsibility to pressure the Kremlin to alleviate at least some of the misery that it has wrought. Of all the consequences of Moscow's unprovoked attack, one of the most unexpected is the spark it has lit in people around the world who've come out to demonstrate for freedom, for the rights of Ukrainians. That includes valiant individuals in places where protesting the Kremlin's war means risking arrest, beatings, or worse, as thousands of Russians and Belarusians have done. For years, we've seen the dangerous tide rolling back democracy and human rights and undercutting the rules-based order, fueled in no small part by Moscow. With this brutal invasion, we, our European allies and partners, and people everywhere are being reminded of just how much is at stake. Now, we see the tide of democracy rising to the moment. With that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay.
Paul Henley, AFP.
Hi, Mr. Secretary.
Hey, Paul.
The West has put unprecedented sanctions on Russia, very punishing, yet it doesn't seem to have slowed the Russian military's advance on Ukraine. Today, NATO seemed to forswear absolutely putting in a no-fly zone that might protect the Ukrainians. Given that, nothing seems to have slowed this invasion. What can you tell the Ukrainian people who only see things getting worse, seeing a disaster, seeing more suffering, and are pleading for more help from the West? And I have a little follow-up. I could ask it now or in a moment.
No, go ahead, please.
The West, NATO, has been involved in this in terms of supplying a lot of arms, which you've mentioned, to Ukraine. Can't it supply more effective arms, larger weapons, jets have been talked about? NATO is engaged in this. Can't it do more for Ukraine?
Thank you. Let me take the second part.
If a no-fly zone is imposed, the United States and the NATO allies would be enforcing that no-fly zone. Putin's just going to fucking ignore it. He doesn't care. And if the United States fires upon a Russian jet inside the no-fly zone, now we've created World War III and everyone dies. So that's why there's no no-fly zone.
Security assistance. We've already been engaged in a remarkable effort, just speaking for the United States. with the various drawdowns that President Biden has done, we've provided over the past year and change more than $1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. The most recent drawdown that was issued by the President of $350 million, we have already sent into Ukraine about $250 million worth of that drawdown. So this is happening every single day, and you're seeing the means that Ukraine needs to defend itself get into the hands of Ukrainians who are doing that. Having said that, one of the things that we talked about at length today in our various meetings at NATO and the EU was what more we can do and how to do it effectively. I would add that I think, as you know, Foreign Minister Kuleba actually came into our meetings by video. We heard from him directly some of the additional things that Ukraine is looking for. We're working on all of that every single day. We're also a week and change into this horrific war wrought by Russia. We've had already a dramatic impact far beyond, I think, what anyone would have expected on Russia and its economy. The ruble is trading at its weakest levels ever. It's worth less than a penny. Russian authorities are expecting exporters to sell at least 80% of the foreign currency that they have to prop up what is a rapidly weakening currency. The stock market's been closed for days due to a fear of capital flight once it opens. This is the longest stretch of emergency closure since Russia defaulted back in the 1990s. The CBR has more than doubled their key interest rate. It's the central bank to 20%, the highest in almost 20 years. Capital controls, et cetera. We're seeing, I have a list 5 pages long of all the businesses that have left Russia. But the impact is there, it's powerful, it's real, and it is building. So let's see how Russia responds to that as this really takes hold and takes a grip. Second, as we've been demonstrating by not only what we've been saying, but what we've been doing, the support for Ukraine is real, profound, extensive. The security assistance that we just talked about, that continues to go in. The humanitarian support that we continue to build in response to the humanitarian horror that Russia has wrought, as well as economic assistance. Unfortunately, this is not like flipping a light switch. It takes time, and when you have, in the case of Russia and President Putin's Russia, a country that is prepared to go to excessive means to achieve its results, it is a real challenge. But not only are we at it every day, I think what the Ukrainian people can see is virtually the entire world united in support of them, in support of their cause of independence, territorial integrity, freedom, demonstrated by the meetings we had today, demonstrated by the 141 countries that came together at the United Nations to make that clear. So there is a huge tide of support for Ukraine. There is a huge weight bearing down on Russia. Let's see what the impact is.
Maeve McMahon, Euronews.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the floor. Maeve McMahon, Euronews. So we heard this morning at NATO that the situation will get worse before it gets better. So tell us, what do you know that we don't? And is the no to the no-fly zone set in stone completely, or would you consider it if this conflict does become a massacre? And just to follow up, was it naive of you and, of course, the Europeans to trust in Putin to opt for diplomacy? Thank you so much.
When we say it is likely to get worse, it's unfortunately based on everything we know about President Putin's methods when it comes to seeking to subjugate another country to his will, or another region to his will. We saw it in Chechnya. We've seen it in Syria. We saw it, of course, in 2014 in Ukraine. And what we're seeing on the battlefield is Russian forces seeking to encircle the major cities, including Kyiv, and we're seeing them use increasingly brutal methods including going at civilians and civilian populations. So I think the terrible expectation is that the suffering we've already seen is likely to get worse before it gets better for as long as Russia pursues these methods. So that is unfortunately more likely than not, although we are doing everything we can to try to move us to a different track. With regard to the no-fly zone, I think you heard NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg speak to this earlier today. One of the responsibilities we have, even as we are doing everything we can to give the Ukrainian people the means to defend themselves effectively against Russia, we also have a responsibility, as the Secretary General said, to ensure that the war doesn't spill over even beyond Ukraine. And again, because I think he put it so well, as he noted, the only way to actually implement something like a no-fly zone is to send NATO planes into Ukrainian airspace and to shoot down Russian planes, and that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe. President Biden has been clear that we are not going to get into a war with Russia, but we are going to tremendous lengths with allies and partners to provide Ukrainians with the means to effectively defend themselves. And of course, we're seeing every single day their extraordinary heroism, as well as very real results in what they're doing to achieve that. And I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Just, do you feel like, because I remember we spoke together last spring when you were here in Brussels at the NATO headquarters, and I feel the question now is, do you feel that you were naive, or the Europeans were naive to trust in Putin that he would come to the table and he would choose diplomacy over this invasion?
Well, I'll only speak for the United States. I think we were the opposite of naive. We have been saying, warning for months that President Putin was planning and was likely to carry out an aggression of Ukraine, and of course, in recent weeks before the invasion began, I laid out before the United Nations, the Security Council, exactly what we expected Putin to do and how he would do it, creating bogus pretexts for war, and then using those false flags and other operations.
So there's been a school shooting in Kansas, 2 people injured, one of them the school police officer. And it looks like a principal as well. The suspect is under arrest. It was one of the students. So another school shooting here in the United States.
Partners to pursue diplomacy if there is any opportunity to do so, because, as we said all along, it's far preferable than what we're seeing. And again, as we said all along, there are 2 paths that Russia can take. One is diplomacy and dialogue. The other is aggression against Ukraine, and we said we would be prepared either way.
One school police officer, the resource officer is what they call the police officers in the school. So the guy there to stop the shootings, he was shot, and an administrator. Both are currently listed as injured. So hopefully both of them will be okay, although they've both been shot.
West also pays Putin up to $700 million a day in oil, gas and coal. And I know the British Foreign Minister Liz Truss has talked about it, how Britain's looking into it. Are you?
First, as a general proposition, nothing is off the table, and we are evaluating every single day the sanctions, their implementation, and additional measures. The sanctions are designed, in the first instance, of course, to have maximum impact on Russia and Putin, while minimizing harm to us and our allies and partners. There's no strategic interest in reducing the global supply of energy. The immediate effect would be to raise prices at the pump for Americans, and also to pad Russian profits with rising prices. So we've been carving out payments for energy trade and transport from the sanctions that we've been implementing. But we have a strong interest, we and our allies, in degrading Russia's status as a leading energy supplier. over time. This would be a profound strategic shift. That's why
I think he's explained the question there, or explained the answers. You can put metal detectors in schools, but it doesn't stop things from happening outside. What do you do on the school grounds? There's been shootings at metal detectors. Yeah.
Going forward through the export controls we put in place. This is part of a process to reduce reliance, dependence on Russian energy. So that's where our focus is. But again, as I said, we're looking at these things every single day.
How long will that take?
Well,
and how many people have to die in Ukraine before?
I'm not going to put a time frame on it. What's happened in record time, as we've seen, are sanctions and other measures that a few weeks ago people would have said were never going to happen. I think we've demonstrated very, very clearly that what we said we would do many months ago when this crisis first began to emerge, back in November, December, the G7 countries, the European Union, I said that if Russia chose the path of aggression, we would impose massive consequences on Russia, including unprecedented economic sanctions. I know some people thought that was more rhetoric than reality. I think we've demonstrated already how strong that reality is. And again, we're looking every day at measures to increase the extraordinary pressure we're already exerting.
We'll take a final question from Yuri Shako, DW.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I have two questions. First is also on no-fly zone. You said that NATO will not send fighter jets to Ukraine to shoot down Russians. It's understandable, but there is another way to impose this no-fly zone, and I mean sending to Ukraine air defense capabilities. Of course, United States sent Stinger missiles, but I'm speaking about high to medium air defense capabilities to support the currently working Ukrainian defense capabilities with S-300 and Buk, which are working also quite well. The second question is, we saw more than a week of fighting and how Russian forces weren't able to achieve most of its objectives. They were bogged down, they were stopped in many places. So how does this week of war change the US assessment of the might of Russian military that was considered to be quite high? But now, what is your assessment now? Thank you very much.
DW is out of Germany.
First part of the question. We are looking every day at what technologies, what capacities we can effectively deliver to Ukraine to defend itself. And that's an ongoing conversation, literally happening on a daily basis, both with Ukraine and government officials, as well as among allies and partners. And so the main focus is on making sure that anything we provide can be used effectively and in a timely way. So, but as I said, that's quite literally something we're looking at every day. So I don't want to draw any conclusions from the week of invasion in terms of what this tells us about Russia or its capabilities. I think we'll have time to fully assess that. What we do know, what it does tell us, is how extraordinary the Ukrainian people are, their will, their determination, their absolute commitment to defend their country, to defend their freedom, to defend their future. That's the story of the past week, and it's an incredibly powerful one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's switch on over to the Psaki briefing.
Year during this presidency,
and get to Jim.
And
Here we go.
Concerns about a security and by
said that you didn't
review
Let's go back.
impact
More.
President Putin. And the overall labor market rescue plan was really partisan infrastructure law was increasing our economic families. We are Russian oil of that. On partners, we're childcare that we know.
Okay, so fantastic jobs report again this month for the second month in a row. More than 600,000 jobs added in February, which shattered all the forecasts. Again, what have we learned? That the forecasts mean absolutely nothing. There are no experts. So another great jobs report for Biden. But, the economy's in shambles, etc.
Have been really squeezing pocketbooks over several decades.
Thank you, Dr. Ross, for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome anytime. Okay, I just have two items for all of you at the top. I just wanted to provide, I know we announced this yesterday or the day before, but a brief overview on two critical urgent funding needs the administration has sent to Congress. First, to provide assistance to Ukraine. The United States has already provided over $1.4 billion in assistance to Ukraine since 2021. And together with our European allies and partners, we are holding Russia accountable for its unjustified and unprovoked invasion. To continue this important work, we're requesting $10 billion to deliver additional security assistance for Ukraine, to provide life-saving humanitarian assistance for the Ukrainian people, and more support for stronger sanctions enforcement and for U.S. troop deployments to reinforce NATO's eastern flank and deter Russian aggression. This is an urgent priority. I think everybody would agree, Democrats, Republicans, the American people, and it is urgent so that we can continue to deliver on our commitment to support the Ukrainian people. Second, the other part of our request is on COVID-19 response. While we now have tools like vaccines, treatments, tests, and high-quality masks to protect people, we didn't get here by accident. It's a result of wise investments over the past 14 months that led to this widespread availability. And I would note that we did that while we had the rise of two variants that weren't even planned for, of course. Well, they were planned for, but we had to account for them, I should say, in our spending. We need additional funding from Congress to secure more medical supplies.
There's a lot of problems with sending planes into Ukraine. Ukraine has somewhere between 60 and 80 fighter jets. Russia has air superiority. They have all the necessary equipment to shoot down any of those planes. Some of those planes have been doing damage. Apparently, this is all fog of war. We don't have any actual statistics on anything. Can we trust the Ukrainians on what they're saying? Probably somewhat. Can we trust the Russians? No, not at all. So the other option there is to send Ukrainians as many air defense systems as possible, be they Stinger missiles, surface-to-air missiles, or otherwise. That is being done. They are getting defensive weapons. However, declaring a no-fly zone and the Ukrainians shooting the planes down have no connection whatsoever. It's already a no-fly zone. They already don't want the Soviets flying over Ukrainian airspace. So it would be meaningless. And if the NATO declares the no-fly zone, then NATO is responsible for enforcing it. So no, they're not going to declare a no-fly zone because they can't enforce it. The Ukrainian people, they can declare a no-fly zone, and they have. But unfortunately, the NATO's not able to help out. I mean, they could, but we would all die.
To keep this country moving forward. And let me be very clear, this is an urgent request, and this is what is at stake in our fight against COVID. By May, our current supply of
you also have to have a bunch of pilots who know how to operate the machinery. Those are hard to come by. Helicopters would be very handy. I don't know how many helicopters are being sent. I know that Poland decided not to send their MiGs, which are Russian jets. The Ukraine was left with a number of jets. They have some cargo planes and stuff like that. They were left with a whole bunch of equipment when the Soviet Union left. They pretty much collapsed and just left it all there. And they didn't disable it all like the U.S. did before they left Afghanistan. So there are some workable jets, and they've been upgrading for the last 20, 30 years.
Monoclonal antibodies will stock out. By July, the current supply of pre-exposure prophylaxis drugs used to protect immunocompromised people will stock out. Funds are needed in March to secure additional supply in July. You have to order them ahead so that you have them when they're needed when you run out of stock. By September, we anticipate our supply of oral antivirals will run out if additional pills are not purchased now. And within weeks, we expect testing capacity to drop if additional investments are not made soon. And as I would note in the President's State of the Union, he also announced the American people can order more tests. So there, we obviously want to meet that demand. Given how costly COVID has been, in, with so many of our fellow Americans hospitalized or dying and our daily lives disrupted, we simply cannot afford to wait on investing now and keeping people protected. Also, just wanted to give you a preview of the week ahead. On Tuesday, the president will travel to Fort Worth, Texas, to speak with veterans, caregivers, and survivors.
Let's jump ahead a little bit, see if we can get to a question or two. Okay, here we go. Why hasn't Joe Biden made peace around the world?
Will be celebrating with us, voluntarily or not. So we look forward to that. With that,
Movie night tonight, if anyone wants to do a movie night.
Colleen, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Jen. So President Biden has promised that there's going to be no American boots on the ground, and he's also acknowledging that the war in Ukraine is going to impact pocketbooks. We see, especially with what happened last night with the
Anybody actually have a pocketbook anymore? Does anybody carry a pocketbook?
nuclear facility in Ukraine, no sign of Putin stopping, and in fact, he's telling Macron that he's in this till the end. So I wonder what makes the administration confident that Americans are willing to, pay for the price of Ukrainian liberty, especially if this is going to drag on for long. And then I have a separate question.
Sure. Well, to be very clear, and I think you all heard the president convey this in his speech the other night, the reason why we are seeing volatility in the global oil markets, the reason why the price of gas is going up, is not because of steps the president has taken. They are because President Putin is invading Ukraine, and that is creating a great deal of instability in the global marketplace. So what we are trying to do, and what the president is focused on doing, is taking every step we can to mitigate the impact of that. Obviously, he announced the release of more oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, did that in a coordinated way. We have a range of options on the table we are considering. But where we are at in this moment is certainly we are taking steps to stand up for democracy versus autocracy, stand up to the actions of a brutal dictator. But it is because of his actions that we are in this circumstance.
One other question on the Supreme Court reinstating the death penalty for Boston bomber.
Yeah.
Question I have. I wondered, I know there's a moratorium, on the death penalty the DOJ has put in place, but are there any other actions planned or any other steps taken to keep the president's pledge to end the death penalty?
Well, the president certainly supports the Attorney General's decision to issue a moratorium on federal executions while it conducts a comprehensive review of the practice. And that practice and process is ongoing. And the president has expressed before that he has deep concerns about whether capital punishment is consistent with the values that are fundamental to our sense of justice and fairness. Obviously, I can't. This is a case that the Department of Justice could certainly speak to, but I would just say that President expressed horror at the events of the Boston Marathon bombing at the time. He believes that Tsarnaev should be punished for responsibility in the murder of 3 innocent people at the marathon, for wounding dozens of others, and for his role in killing 2 police officers who were attempting to bring him and his brother to justice. And he knows the deep pain that his crime caused. As the president said at the one-year commemoration of the bombing, quote, "I know that no memorial, no words, no act can fully provide the solace that your heart still yearn to acquire." He has made clear, as I noted, his grave concerns about capital punishment as implemented, but he respects the process and the ongoing review that is being led by the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. Go ahead.
Thank you. Overnight, we saw the Russians attack this nuclear power plant last night. The U.S. Embassy in Kyiv noted on Twitter, it is a war crime to attack a nuclear power plant. Putin's shelling of Europe's largest nuclear plant takes his reign of terror one step further. So just to be clear, is it now the position of the U.S. government that Putin has engaged in war crimes?
Well, we have an internal review that's been ongoing prior to last night to collect evidence and data of the targeting of civilians, of the reported use of horrific weapons.
Just say yes. It's war. All of war is a crime, but these are war crimes. It's really simple, but they won't.
Administration. What I will say is that the intentional targeting of civilians or civilian objects would be considered a war crime, even as we are assessing that. Regardless of the legality, this action was the height of irresponsibility. The Kremlin must cease operations around nuclear infrastructure, and we have, of course, remaining concerns. I would note that just on the in the developments that have happened overnight as it relates to the nuclear power plant, I mean, obviously the Russian government's actions were extremely reckless and dangerous. They could have posed a profound threat to the safety of civilians in the region and beyond. We do applaud the ability of the Ukrainian operators to keep all 6 reactors in safe conditions while under attack, and to report as they were able to the nuclear regulator, which certainly was helpful. As you know, last night the president not only spoke with President Zelensky, he also spoke last night to the head of the National Nuclear Security Administration for an update on the situation at the plant. So that is a piece of positive news for the moment. But we remain concerned, of course, about the fact that they have clearly taken control of the plants, or it appears so, the Russian military has. The best step for nuclear safety would be for Russia to immediately withdraw its forces around the facility.
And on the Hill, we've now seen this really sort of broad range of bipartisan support behind this legislation to ban Russian oil imports. The Speaker has said she's all for banning Russian oil. I guess first, just what is your stance on the Senate bill, and is this something that the President would sign?
Well, I think as we talked about a little bit yesterday, how the President has been approaching any of the steps we've taken as it relates to Russia and the actions of Russia and holding President Putin accountable is to take every step to the maximum impact that will impact President Putin, the Russian economy. I mean, the stock market has been closed now for the longest time in history. Russia is in a full-blown financial crisis. According to JP Morgan analysts, there will be a collapse in the Russian GDP. So clearly those actions are working. We will have one of his principles from the beginning has been to do that in a unified way, in a coordinated way, because we are stronger if we are together as we work with the Europeans. The third principle, or another principle, I'm not sure what number I'm on right now, has been to, while we're maximizing the impact, to minimize it on the American people, on the global markets, on and certainly we are mindful as we look at all of these options of making sure we're not having that impact. So we want to maintain, as Dr. Rouse said, a steady global supply of energy with whatever actions we take.
So is that a no? He would not sign this legislation?
Again, we remain in contact and discussion with members of Congress. We are looking at options we could take right now to cut U.S. consumption of Russian energy, but we are very focused on minimizing the impact to families. If you reduce supply in the global marketplace, you are going to raise gas prices. You're going to raise the price of oil, and that is something the President is very mindful of and focused on. Go ahead.
CC alluded to something several officials have, and you kind of just did too, that there is a review of options that would allow you to cut consumption but maintain market stability and supply. Can you outline any of those options in detail that are under review right now?
Well, there are both international and domestic options. I'm not going to get into too much detail because our focus is on discussing what's possible, what will have the maximum impact, and not putting any of them at risk. But broadly speaking, part of what we're trying to do internationally is have conversations, as we have been for weeks now, with global suppliers about meeting the needs, the supply needs in the marketplace. The reduction of supply, the reduction of oil would raise prices, right? So that is one of the things that we have been focused on. We've talked a little bit about engagements that Brett McGurk has had, that Amos Hochstein have had. These are ongoing discussions. There's not a day that goes by, or maybe even an hour that goes by probably, where members of our national security team and economic team aren't communicating with their counterparts around the world about exactly this issue. There are also a range of domestic options that are out there. Obviously, the President announced the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That is something where the process is just getting going right now. It takes a little bit to get that going. And then, he'll consider and continue to discuss with his team other steps that we could take domestically.
Is the potential
National gas tax holiday.
for an Iran deal
And to encourage the states to do the same and fund the states if necessary. All that COVID money that the Republicans saying is still sitting out there, not being used. I mean, you want the Republicans to be forced to call it a tax cut, say this money is to help the states bring down their gas tax, which is going to save money for the American people. But where are the gas tax highest in the Democratic states. So the Republicans will then vote against saving money for the American people. And you know what? The people won't care. They just don't get it. Do you know why the jobs report is so much higher than people thought it would be? Do you know why it was last month? Because the child tax credit ended at the end of December. So all these families that were getting money for their kids, $300, $600, $900 a month, now we got to figure out how to make that money again. Now we're down money. All the children are in poverty. You got to go to work. We got to take the crappy jobs. I'm surprised the Republicans aren't capitalizing on that. Speaking of capitalizing, I need to eat. I have an audition in a few minutes, so I'm going to eat. I'm going to stop here. Hopefully, YouTube's will save this place right here, and I might get a chance to broadcast a little later today after my audition. But for now, I'm going to go put some food in my tummy and warm up and get ready for my audition. Everybody be good to yourself, and maybe we'll see you later today. Okay, bye.